Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vaga Muradian here at the Navy League's annual Sea Air Space Conference and Trade Show outside Washington, D.C. in National Harbor, Maryland, where our coverage is sponsored by Fincantieri, Huntington Ingalls Industries, and Leonardo DRS. And we have with us the commander of the U.S. Navy Sea Systems Command, Vice Admiral Tom Moore. Sir, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for the time.
Good to see you again, Vaga, as always.
It's a real treat. I know Rory is going to give us the hook if we don't cover ground before your next appointment. Number one, want to start with the Ford class. Navy has put a request for information, a request for proposal out to talk about doing a two-ship buy. There's a lot of receptiveness on the Hill. We talked to Sea Power Chairman Whitman, and he is convinced that that's the right way to go. Of course, he'd say that. He's the man from down there in Virginia where the ships are going to be built and operate from. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of the deal, why it's attractive from your standpoint.
Yeah, so for a couple reasons. One, we've made significant strides on CVN 79, bringing the cost down relative to CVN 78. It's still, the cost performance on there is still fantastic. We're running 18% fewer hours on 79 than 78. But if you really want to take that next kind of quantum improvement, then the two-ship buy gets you there. And historically, if you look in when we did two-ship buys, 72 and 73 and CVN 74 and 75, those were by far the lowest man hours to build ship and the lowest price. So if you're looking for the lowest price, that's clearly the way to do it. The other piece of this is if you look at the force structure assessment, which says we need 12 carriers, if you're continuing to build them at 5-year centers, you're not going to get there. It's a carrier lasts 50 years, it's just math. If you want 12 carriers and they last 50 years, you got to be building them on centers of about 4 years to get there. So if we're going to continue to build them on 5-year centers like we are right now, eventually we're going to be down to 10. So this provides us the opportunity not only to provide significant cost benefit to the taxpayer, it provides stability to Huntington Ingalls New Purdue Shipbuilding at a period of time which is very important as we grow the size of the shipbuilding industrial base, and it will reduce costs. And I think when you factor all those things together, it's a win-win for both industry and for the Navy and for the nation.
Full disclosure, he was PEO carriers, so you know a thing or two about carriers. You know about which you speak. But talk about what kind of percentage reduction in cost there is. You know, everybody's been talking and uses $13 billion as the Ford number. Where does that number come down to if you use this kind of an approach? And talk to us about how you got that down on 79 even, you know, in terms of, you know, so where did it go on 79 and where do you think it'll go when you get further out?
Yeah, so the way we got it down on 79 was basically going back and looking at how we built the ship relative to CVN 78. 78 being the first of the class. We started to build the ship with the design only 37% complete. We didn't have a full bill of material, kind of basic blocking and tackling, if you will, but driven to that direction by some changes in the program late in the game and when it was funded by Congress. When we got to CVN 79, we were a lot smarter. We had a full bill of material. We had a stable design. And when you can give the shipbuilder a stable design and a full bill of material and incorporate the lessons learned from the previous ship, then you start to see some significant savings. So from first ship to second ship, CVN 79 will reduce its hours more than any other shipbuilding program that we've seen. So that's one reason. As you get to CVN 80, how do you get further savings? Well, you got to continue to roll the lessons over from 79 to 80, and then you've got to recognize that there's significant savings on the material side of the house, which makes up about 30 to 40% of the cost of the ship, by buying that material in an economic order quantity. So the combination of learning from 79 and continuing to roll lessons learned forward, and there are things we're going to do better on 80 than we did on 79. There's technology we're going to take off of 79. We're going to get rid of the hydraulic aircraft elevators. We're going to get rid of the dual band radar and go to this enterprise air surveillance radar. All those will drive costs down, and then combine that with a stable engineering design and the economic order, your quantity you're going to get to go buying these things in advance. And we would expect the price, I think what they've said is, we expect to get about $1 billion out per ship by doing them 2 ships at a time. And the results, have some factual basis on it. If you go back and look again and look at what it costs us to build CVN 72 and 73 and CVN 74 and 75 relative to the hours it took us to build the predecessor CVN 71 and the one that came after CVN 74, CVN 75, both those hours went up significantly. So I think we can stay with some pretty good fact-based that we're going to get significant savings from two-ship buy. Multi-years in general prove that out, whether it's Virginia class or DDG as well.
Would you say that that's a 25% saving on each ship, or 30? Was there? Or would you be comfortable using a figure?
I think we're talking 10% or more. I'm not sure I would go to the 25%, but I think what we've said is the two-ship buy, we'll get double-digit savings for the ship, which is, when you're talking $13 billion, it's a fairly significant chunk of change.
Yeah, $1 billion here, $1 billion here, it's real money.
Right.
Let me ask you, though, about how, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of investment to get this savings. Everybody says, oh, we should just make shipbuilding cheaper. Yeah. But every ship is a trade-off. It's a trade-off between survivability, it's a trade-off on capability. Nuclear power is important for us, even though we've made quantum leaps in reducing the engineering section on the ships, reducing maintenance on the plant. It still has more plant, for example, more maintenance on it, for example, or more care you have to take in some ways than a conventional plant. Where can, but if to save money, you also have to spend money. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about how this dynamic equation, because everybody's saying like, hey, let's build cheaper ships. There are limits to what you can build, and then in order to get that incremental improvement will mean investment. So talk to us about this dynamic, about where can you find, how much savings is reasonable to find, given that we're building ships for a very high-intensity warfighting environment?
Yeah, I think the high-intensity warfighting environment is a key point. And a lot of people will say, hey, you paid this for a Nimitz class and you paid this for a Ford. And my analogy is generally, hey, I have a 1982 Honda Accord and I have a 2017 Honda Accord. They're both Honda Accords, but they're nowhere near in capability. And I mean, one has power steering, one doesn't. One has power windows, one doesn't. One has satellite radio, one doesn't. So I think when you're trying to compare costs to past platforms, you have to take into account the threat and the capabilities that we want to build. And so you're going to pay a little bit more to provide a ship that's a lot more advanced in a capability. As far as where can you go to continue to drive savings out, there's two things. One, on the shipyard side of the house, they need to continue to make investments in their plant to allow them to build the ships more effectively and efficiently. So on the carrier side of the house, it means building more space to build the ship inside. We know that building indoors, even large sections of ship, is the better way to go. It means investing in new welding equipment that can do a lot more automation. It means digital technology that gets away from paper. There's a whole laundry list of things that you could do in the shipbuilding industry that there's an initial upfront investment, but the long-term gains will be beneficial. And then on the ship side of the house, it's important to remember that 40% of the cost of the ship, the life cycle cost, is really what you got to focus on. There are things we can do up front in the ship in terms of the material uses, the types of coatings that we use, that will reduce the long-term cost of the ship on the life cycle side of the house. We tend to, when faced with a tough choice on the new construction side, we tend to, the first thing that we jettison are things that will cost us a little bit more money up front, but will have substantial savings over the life of the ship. And so that's always the battle that you have in DC, which is the near-term desire to spend money in the budget versus the long-term savings that you're actually able to get if you're willing to make some investments up front.
So you think that there's actually still room for considerable savings by applying some of those lessons and maybe spending some more money up front in order to reduce, for whether it's dissimilar metals or better metals or...
Yeah, both. Yes, absolutely. And then it's two things. It's one, it's maintenance costs, and then it's also the fact that people make up the largest single life cycle cost of the ship. So as we use technology on the ship, what can we do to reduce the number of people on board and continue to make it an effective warfighting platform? Ford tried to do that from the bottom up. They've been pretty successful, but as was LCS. But as we learn and go forward, I think we need to continue to embrace technology that's going to reduce the number of people on board the ship.
Let me ask you about the ship repair capability, because that's something that I think folks don't focus as much on, but there is a massive backlog of repair that's necessary. There is a massive backlog at the government shipyards, but there's also a massive backlog even in the commercial yards. Talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in order to be able to eat through that backlog, how you're working with industry in order to try to get there. And I have one follow-up question, which is where are we on repairs for both McCain and Fitzgerald, both of which were badly damaged, and you visited them recently out in Asia?
So on the repair side of the house, I would say that the repair side of the house is probably even more important than getting the health of the industrial base on the new construction side of the house. Everybody tends to focus on the big yards. If you get to 355 ships and you can't do the maintenance, it doesn't do the combatant commanders any good. So I'll break this down into kind of two pieces. One, on the public side of that yard, we have had a significant mismatch between the capacity of the yard to do work and the workload, and that's why we've had a backlog of work in the naval shipyards, kind of with the the USS Boise last year kind of being symbolic of what happens when you can't match those two up.
That was a very unfortunate poster child.
It was, but it was in many ways a seminal moment because it got people's attention. We had, in many cases, put boats into the yard and then kept them there for 50, 55 months when they were supposed to be out in 20 months, and people tend to forget once they get in the shipyard. USS Albany will be 800 days late when she finishes. And so that's not fair to the crew, it's not fair to the ship. So on the public shipyard side of the house, two big things. One, we're starting to hire, and we'll be at 36,100, which is where we need to be across the 4 naval shipyards to meet the capacity that the workload that I can see out there. When I do that and I start training the workforce, and then I combine that with this long-term plan we just submitted to Congress on optimizing the shipyards, making capital investments in new equipment, improving the layout so that you can flow the work better. When you combine those two things together, we'll get the productivity we need on the public side of the house. On the private side of the sector side, we've got the same challenge. We've got more work than we have capacity. And the bigger challenge, frankly, is as we grow to 355, we're going to go from 71 nuclear-powered ships to 80. The public shipyards, when I get to 36,100, they can manage that. But the majority of the growth to 355 is going to be on non-nuclear surface ships. And the private sector today does not have the capacity to do all that work. Some of that is because we have not provided them with a stable, predictable plan, and they're behaving rationally, which is they're not making investments if they can't project that they're going to get work into the future. So as I was talking about in my last panel, we've got to provide a stable, predictable plan for the shipyards in a competitive environment that keeps the cost down but allows them to see what the workload is going to be going forward. And then we've got to figure out how to partner with the private sector so that they'll make investments in their shipyards as well. We do pretty well with that with the big yards, Newport News, EB. We can build that CapEx into our contracts and share that risk with them. And so they do tend to make those investments. The private yards, the smaller yards, the repair yards don't. And it's going to be equally important that they make the same amount of investments. And so I'm looking to see how we can partner with them in a way that's similar to what I'm doing on the new construction yards to allow them to make investments going forward that will improve their productivity and throughput.
How long do you think before you have a plan that you can take to industry and say, hey, look, here's some kind of a roadmap that you guys can plan against?
We think, so the same plan that I provided to Congress for the public yards, which we gave them in February, we're working with industry now, and I expect by the end of this year, calendar year, we'll have a plan that's similar that says here's the roadmap for the private sector. Fitzgerald and McCain, real quick. So Fitzgerald's at Ingalls. She's been in there. She's doing well. She's up on the land facility. We're doing work on her. We've met all the milestones. It's early, obviously. She's scheduled to deliver in January of 2020. She's got a significant amount of modernization that we'll do while she's in there anyway, take advantage of that to make her as capable as possible when we send her back. But she's got probably about $600 million worth of work. McCain is in Yokosuka. Significantly less work done, a lot more structural work on the aft port quarter. Right now, my expectation is we'll be able to deliver her before the end of this year. And that work is probably going to be in the $120 to $150 million range. But both ships are off to a good start. As in anything, even when you have a car in an accident, you think you know what the damage is, and you start pulling things apart and start getting in the middle of it. And so I'm a little bit not nervous, but I'm always wary that there's always new discovery out there. So while we have said January of 20 for Fitzgerald in this fiscal year or this calendar year for McCain, and we're going to do everything possible to get those back. We still have some discovery, I believe, to go. But both ships are off to a very good start. And I think not only does the fleet need them back, but I think symbolically, in particular, to get McCain back this year would be very important for the surface Navy, and because she's going to provide some well-needed capability in that area of the world.
You're a keen student of history,
Sure.
and you and I have talked about the industrial base, and you just sort of laid it out what the challenges are, both on the new construction side. If we surge, for example, some people were saying let's surge to 3 submarines a year. Submarine production is already under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
By the way, on submarines, are you concerned at all about the delivery rates on submarines at this point, given that the schedules were way early and over time have sort of steadily slipped? And are you going to be able to stay on time, particularly as Columbia comes online?
Yeah, I think the answer, I think what you're seeing is a natural, as we've gone to 2 ships per year, you've seen the natural tension in the yard. We're now, our productivity rates are, demand signals going up, and we're seeing a little bit of stress on the delivery rates. They're still delivering, the Virginia class still delivering pretty close to on schedule. I think you'll see the same thing naturally as you go to 3. I think the yards have the capacity. If you go back and look at how many how many Los Angeles class submarines we were building in the Reagan buildup in the 80s and 90s, well above what we're building today. But it takes a little bit of time. And so both Newport News and I think Huntington Ingalls have the facilities necessary to build, and they'll have to build that workforce back up, and then they'll get the workforce trained to do that. So I'm not worried about the ability to get to 3 ships per year. I think the industrial base has proven they can do that if there's a stable funding profile out there. And then you're going to throw Columbia on top of that while we're building Ford-class carriers and Nimitz-class RCOHs. I think industry would tell you that if there's a stable, predictable plan and they know what's coming, they will man appropriately. But you need to probably give them 3 to 5 years, of a stable plan and stick to it. That's been the challenge. And when I was first at Newport News Shipbuilding as a lieutenant commander in 1994, refueling Enterprise, they had 27,000 production workers there. Today, they're about 14 to 15,000. So imagine, with double the size of the workforce, they can get the work done. So I'm not worried about that. I think eventually we will get there, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Before Rory appropriately tackles me, let me ask one last brief but important historical question. You and I have talked about this. You just talked about the industrial base and the condition of it. Almost, how much attention are you paying to wartime surge capability in the event that something unfortunate happens? What are the plans to start investing in that extra capability? Because in some respects, World War II was won in part because of our ability to produce a lot of ships and send them forward, but also our extraordinary ability to repair extremely damaged ships and get them back into the fight very, very quickly.
Well, that's a great question. We certainly today are probably not equipped to go handle the level of damage that we saw in World War II, but it has been a significant point of discussion at senior levels of the Navy, which is how do we move from this kind of peacetime footing that we're in today to a more flexible, agile environment in the repair side of the house. And I think McCain and Fitzgerald kind of highlighted some of that to us in terms of do we have heavy lift capability? How would we get a ship out of theater that was damaged? So I think it's something we got to go work on. Growing the size of the industrial base by itself will give you some of the flexibility that you're going to need going forward. And so, as you said, it's a little bit of a student of history, reading Freedom's Forge right now. If it's a great book, and a lot of people think that we snapped our fingers in World War II and all of a sudden overnight had this great war machine. In fact, it took us 4 or 5 years of the best minds in the country to go work on this before we were able to ramp up. So we're looking at it now. We're looking at the investments we would need to make, and we would make do if we had to go fight tomorrow, like we always do. But to get to probably the point where we need to be relative to something in the World War II era, it's probably going to take us a couple of years to ramp up to that level, frankly.
Vice Admiral Tom Moore, Commander of the U.S. Navy Sea Systems Command. Sir, it's always a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Sure. Thanks, Vago.